All right, after learning everything you ever wanted to know about the bin window of Edius, it is now time in this tutorial to take a look at the timeline window of Edius. And I know some of you might be wondering, are we ever going to get around to editing? I want to learn how to edit. And yes, actually, we are getting very close. But before we actually start our edit, there are a few things that I want to point out about the timeline window of Edius. And some of you who are new to editing, you might be wondering, well, what is a timeline window? What is that all about? Well, as you open up your program, just as a point of review, there are 4 main windows in Edius. Usually, you can have some turned on and off, so your number of windows that are open at any given time might vary depending on what you have switched on and off. But generally speaking, by default, as you start the Edius program, there are usually 4 main windows that show up. And if something is missing in your configuration as you start, you can usually get them back by hitting Show All. And if that doesn't work and you're not seeing a window that you think should be there, you can go up to your View menu and try hitting Windows Layout Normal. And this should get the basic window configuration back based on if you have 1 monitor connected to your computer or 2. So what are the main 4 windows? First of all, you have a window that contains a place where you can preview your clips and decide which clips you want to use. Go to your source window, your asset window, or bin window, double-click on any image, and that will show up in your preview window. And this video preview window can either show just the 1 monitor, the way we have it displaying at the moment, or you can select to have it showing in the dual mode and see 2 previews showing here. And the difference between the 2 is that the one on the very left-hand side is where we take a look at our clips, and then when we play our timeline, it'll show up in the second monitor. This is called the record monitor. So that's window number 1. Preview monitor, play monitor, record monitor, or what might be better termed a timeline window monitor, because any media that we have on our timeline, when we play it, it's going to show up in the second monitor. So we might call this the timeline monitor. Okay, the second big window is our bin window, and we've already done 3 tutorials on that. If you're just jumping into this tutorial, we've recorded a lot of information about understanding and working with the bin window. Just something that we might point out about this bin window is that it is more than a bin window. It is what we might call a pallet window, and the bin palette is just one of many different palettes that we could take a look at in this window. So one moment it's a bin window, but when we click down on one of these tabs, it becomes our effect window, and we can take a look at the various transitions or video filters that we could use in our project by pointing to the Effects tab. And so now it could be called the Effects window. We've also seen in previous tutorials how it can be a way to import media using the Source Browser tab. Now, a third window down here is actually just a second palette window. We could have our bin window down here if we wanted to. We could just grab a hold of this tab and drop it down here. And now this becomes our bin window. Problem is, it's so small that it wouldn't be effective as our bin window. We would have to make it bigger in order for it to work. So we might as well leave it where it is. But just so you know that this third window is really just another palette window. In fact, if we wanted to get rid of it altogether, let's drag this bin back to where it belongs. And if you prefer to have it right at the beginning, you can rearrange that. If we wanted to get rid of this secondary palette monitor, we could just take our tab and drop it into our third one, and then we can extend out our fourth window, the timeline window. And so the window that we want to talk about in this lesson is the timeline window. When we talk about the timeline window, this is what we're talking about down here. And you've probably already played around with Edius enough now so that you know that you can rearrange these windows. Just take your mouse you'll see that it changes from a regular mouse arrow. It changes when you get up to the point that separates the one window from the other. You'll see that your mouse cursor changes to an up and down arrow. And when you see that, well, you can just simply press down on your mouse, your left mouse button. And now as you scroll up your mouse, you can see that you can rearrange the size of these windows. And so for this tutorial, why don't you go ahead and rearrange this so that your timeline window is large, so that as we work together and point out a few things about the timeline window, you will have it displaying on your computer as a very large window as well. Now, whenever you want to work with the timeline window, you should make sure that your focus is on the timeline window. Right now, you might notice there's a little green border around our preview window. That means that our focus is actually on our preview window. And in addition to that, you'll see that there's a blue square around the record preview window or our timeline monitor. That means that our focus is currently on our timeline monitor. If we were to hit our space bar right now, notice which one of these video clips will play. Well, this is such a static shot it doesn't show up, but you'll see that it's actually the record monitor that is playing. But if we want to work with the timeline window, we need to set our focus there. And you can do that simply by taking your mouse and clicking in your timeline window. And you'll see that the green border now surrounds the timeline window. And our focus is now on the timeline window. A lot of times this happens without you really realizing it. For example, if our focus is up here in our preview window, but then we decide that we want to, point to our timeline cursor or our playhead, we might call it, and move it around. Well, in the process of pointing to our playhead, we have changed our focus to the timeline window. So a lot of times this happens in the background without really realizing that it's happening. You're changing your focus. Now, I think maybe what we'll do is first of all just remove all of the media that we have here. I'm going to take my mouse and point to an area before the clips start, press down on my left mouse button, and I can lasso this whole area by moving my mouse to the right. You'll see that they become highlighted, and once they're highlighted or selected, I can just hit the delete key, and that's removed all of those clips from the timeline. I haven't removed them from my hard drive. I haven't removed them from the project. I've simply removed them from the timeline. And that's because my focus is on the timeline. If my focus had been in the bin and I had selected some clips and hit the delete key, well, then they would have been removed from the project. Again, they wouldn't be removed from my hard drive, but they would be removed from the project. But because my focus was on the timeline window when I selected the clips and hit the delete key, those clips have been removed from my timeline, but they would still be available in my bin window should I want to bring those clips back later. All right, what can we show you about the timeline window? Well, first of all, let's notice that there is a heavy division line here. And if you look closely, you'll see that it's kind of a heavier line, a double line. And what that indicates is that it is a separation between video and audio. All of the tracks above the heavy line are video tracks. And all of the tracks below that heavy line are audio tracks. As an example, let's bring a clip over from our bin window. And you can do that just by pointing to any clip on your bin window. And with your left mouse button, click down on that clip. And with your mouse button held down, drag that down to your timeline window. And you'll see that this kind of lights up your timeline window a little bit and actually shows you the size of the clip or the length or the duration based on how wide that clip is. We could choose to place this on video track 2 just by pointing to video track 2, or if we wanted to place that video on video track 1, we could just point it to video track 1. And then when you found the place where you want to put that video, just release your mouse button and the video clip pops in. And we could scroll our playhead over to it and then just hit the space bar in order to play that clip. Now, if we wanted to see this video and audio a little bit better, we can open up our tracks, and that's what this little left-hand sidebar is all about. This is where we can do a lot of commands that affect how our timeline looks and works. So if we want to open up our tracks to see this clip, both the video and audio a little better, we can do that by taking our mouse and pointing to the little arrow here beside the track that you want to expand out and open it up. Let's do it also with our audio. Now, we don't see a lot of, it doesn't look like there's hardly any audio on this clip at all that I've done with my DSLR camera, and as many of you know, the mics on these DSLR cameras aren't the best, so I had the audio way down. To help out with our example, let's go after some clips here that might have more audio and some interview shots where we've used external audio as we recorded. Yes, here we go. This is a much better example of an audio clip that can actually show the waveform as you drop these onto your timeline. So once again, as we look at our timeline window, when we look at this division between the top and the bottom, this double line here, this heavy double line, we see that all of our video is going to land up above that line. All of our audio is going to land below that line. Now, Edius does allow you to have a track that does contain both video and audio. And in fact, we could add a track like that if we go over to this little sidebar here, the left-hand sidebar, and right-click on it and choose Add. We do have the option of adding a VA track to above. So let's just, as an example, a quick example, show that. And as we look over here, we see that this track is now designated as a VA track. And if we were to bring down one of our clips and throw it on that track, we would see that the video and audio are together on that track. And we could open those up and see the video and audio together on one track. And so if you are coming from an editing program where you are used to editing that way, you might want to choose to do it that way here in Edius. I'm not sure that there is any other video program that does that. And so we won't be doing any tutorials that show you how to edit that way. If you are really interested in learning how to edit that way, there might be some other tutorials out there that you can take a look at that'll help you understand how to edit that way. But we won't be doing that here. So let's get rid of that clip. And let's actually get rid of this VA track. We can delete any track just by going over and right-clicking on this little left-hand column here again and choosing to delete that, and then that track is gone. Okay, but let's say we do want to add a couple of more video tracks and a couple more audio tracks. How do we do that? Again, we just go over to this little column here, point your mouse, and right-click anywhere within this space. You'll get that drop-down menu. Go to Add, and this time let's add V tracks to above. And let's choose 2 tracks, hit the OK button, and now you see we have 4 video tracks. And then let's go down to the audio section and do the same thing, right-click in that area, and let's choose to add a track, A for audio, to below. And again, we'll choose 2, hit OK. Now, we'll notice that even though we selected Add Audio Tracks to below, that the audio tracks were placed above the audio track that we had already started here. What's going on? Well, I put you on pause there as I experimented with this a little bit. I'm guessing that this is just a little bug in version 7. Let's check our version here. Version 7.21. Might just make a note. If you are working with something that's 7.21 or below, it looks like they have a little bug here in the program. Not a big deal. If you want those video tracks to go below what you're working on, actually go to Add a Track to Above, hit 2, and you'll notice this time they do go below. So it's just a little bug in the interface. Some lines of code must have got crossed there. So if you want to add those video tracks above the area where you're working, point to the track where you're working and select the opposite of what you would think. All right, we probably have more tracks than what we need at the moment, so we could select delete. All right, so now we have 5 audio tracks and 4 video tracks. Now, to help organize your timeline a little bit, Edius allows you to name tracks. Let's just spread this out a little bit so that we have a wider left-hand column here. And notice that we can rename the track. Right now, they're just 1A, 2A, 3A. Well, we could rename those to something, well, whatever we like. Just right-click on it, hit rename, and now we could say this track is for ambient audio. This is the audio that naturally comes with all of your clips. The second one we might rename as narration. Third track we might rename as music. Fourth track we might rename as sound effects, or any additional audio that you might want to add to your video. And we can leave the fifth one unnamed and discover how we might want to use that track at a later time. Now, just because you name a track a certain thing does not necessarily mean that you have to place your music in the music track. There's nothing that's going to blow up if you place your music somewhere else on one of these other tracks. And you'll probably find as you're feverishly working on an edit, maybe you're working on a deadline, that some of your audio might end up on a different track than what you've designated here. Your narration might end up in the music track, and the music track might end up down in 5. It happens. But at least as you start out an edit, it's nice to try and be organized. And you could do the same if you like with the video track. I don't see as big of a need to name your video tracks, but just know that you can do that. Let's maybe take a look at some of the other options when you do a right click. The first one is height. If we wanted to see that audio track expanded out larger, we could hit high, and now we can get a really nice look at our waveform. And you remember that you can expand your timeline out or contract your timeline. And if you don't have that set up on a keyboard shortcut, here's the little slider bar up here where you can do that. You can make your clips very small, or you can expand them out to be able to work on a very small section of your video and maybe do some very fine-tune cutting. And this is where it's nice to have your audio expanded out, because you can take a look and a lot of times know how you should make your cuts based on the visual of your audio track. Now, if your audio track, if your waveform is not looking like mine is, it could be a setting option that you have here under User Settings. Go up to Settings, User Settings, and go to Application, and go to the Timeline, and notice that you have an option here of showing your waveform in the log form or the linear form. Let's just switch it to linear for a second, and you'll see how that changes the look of your waveform. Let's hit Apply. Well, you'll see that this really changes the perspective, the visual of your waveform. And so if your waveform is looking more like this, and you're wondering, well, did I have the audio too low? I can barely see that there's anything going on there. Well, it could be just the way that you have your settings here in User Settings under Application, Timeline. Change that back to log, hit Apply, and now your audio waveform looks a lot better, something that's a lot more usable, at least in my opinion, as you work with your edit. Okay, but there are other ways of changing the height of your audio tracks and video tracks for that matter. And there's also ways of changing how much of your timeline window shows video tracks and how much shows audio tracks. Take your mouse and slide it up to this hard double line here. You'll notice that your mouse cursor changes. Well, when you see that change, just left click on your mouse and you'll see that you can slide that double line up. Now we are showing more of our audio tracks and less of our video tracks. Or you could do the opposite if you're working primarily with the video and you want to see more video than you do audio. Well, you can adjust that as well. And the same works for the height of your tracks themselves. Rather than take the trouble to go and click in this area and go up to height and select one of these presets, one of these 5 presets, well, you can also, selecting that area in between your tracks and holding down your left mouse button and then sliding your mouse down, you can expand or contract any of the audio tracks or any of the video tracks to make them larger or smaller. Let's say we wanted to see our video track a lot better, showing up these thumbnails, and to give us a lot better idea of what clip we're working with, well, we can have that video track expanded way out. By default, Edius shows you the first thumbnail of any clip as well as the last thumbnail. If you are coming from a video editing program that shows you multiple thumbs or many thumbs for any given clip, and you prefer to edit that way, there is a user setting that you can change to show you multiple thumbs. You can change that setting up in the same area where we were just looking to change our waveform. Go back there, it's settings, user settings, application, timeline, and down here under clip thumbnail, you can choose to have just the in and the out clip thumbnail showing. You could choose just to have the first frame of the video showing for any clip, or just the last frame, or you could choose all. Let's try selecting all, this to apply, and now we see that it is showing more thumbnails, and this gives you a visual idea of what the whole clip looks like. And if we were to expand out our timeline, we'll see that it generates more thumbnails. This probably isn't the best clip to use as an example of this feature because it's all the same. Let's maybe go after a clip that might have a little bit more variation. Here's a long one, 4 minutes. Let's drop that down there. Yeah, here's a better example. As we're looking at this clip on the timeline, as we view the thumbnails, we can see how that clip changes a lot better than we would be able to if we just had the first and the last thumbnail showing. Let's expand it out, and we'll see that the number of thumbnails grow. When it says show all thumbnails, of course, that's going to depend on how you have your timeline expanded out or contracted. Right now, of course, we're not showing all thumbnails. We're only showing 3. But as you expand that clip out, it's going to show more thumbnails. And if you have it expanded all the way out, it's going to show every frame. Now, it's debatable as to the value of this option. If you're just brand new to editing, you could probably get away with learning how to edit just showing the first and last frame. In most cases, that's really all of the visual that you need to see at a glance when you're looking at the timeline. And I believe does save on resources. So if you're working on a computer that doesn't have a lot of memory, you might want to have that set to just showing the first and the last. However, if you do have a lot of memory in your computer and you are coming from another program that you got used to editing that way, just know that you can change that in a user setting. Well, it looks like we are running long again on this tutorial, and so I think we'll close it off for now and break this up into 2 or 3 tutorials like we did with the bin window. So for now, that's it for learning the timeline window, part 1.